Hey, we're live. Cool. So good afternoon. Welcome. Hopefully everyone is having a fun time at Stir Trek so far. Always some good talks to see. I am very curious about how many naps have been taken in the reclining chairs, because I can only imagine 8:30 session and after lunch session would be kind of rough. So if you've stayed awake through the entire time, good on you. So today we are going to talk about debugging burnout. Burnout is kind of a hot button issue in pick your industry at this point. So we're going to talk about that in kind of the developer sense, but more so using tools and patterns that we've established as developers applied to a new vertical, if you will. So debugging burnout. First off, who am I? Why should you care? Big note, I am not a therapist. None of this actually constitutes as actual therapy advice and things like that. Because I clicked very quickly, we're going to go back a slide as well. My name is Samuel Shaw. I am a software developer out at Cover My Meds. So I do coding stuffs. I like fighting stuffs. Bourbon was my COVID hobby of choice. Have a dog. Recently got married, so family as well. The most important thing is I am also burnt out. And that is the thing that really initiated this entire talk and this entire conversation, is this is a selfish talk. This is something that I have been going through repeatedly through multiple parts of my career, and I have found that the best way for me to learn is to teach. And so, congratulations, you are the guinea pigs and the vessel for me learning how to deal with burnout. So, for that to work, this is a huge asterisk attached to this entire talk. This is a data point of Sam. Some of the things hopefully will resonate with you, be things that you can take and apply to your lives. Some of them may not. That is okay. Every journey through burnout can and should look different. So I am giving you options. I am talking about my journey. Hopefully some of it can resonate. If it doesn't, I just encourage you to participate in your own journey as well. So, kicking this off, what is burnout? So in order to have this conversation about anything, we have to get to a shared understanding where we are on the same page. So if we look at burnout, the ICD-10, so that is the International Center for Diseases, Revision 10, has a listing for burnout with the approximate symptoms of burnout, which, you know, always love to have the definition of the thing in the thing, but also physical and emotional exhaustive state, which is interesting. I can appreciate that. I guess the other thing, if we backtrack even further, the term burnout first was coined in 1970s by the American psychologist Herbert Freudenberger. No idea if I said that right. He used it to describe the consequences of severe stress and high ideals in the helping professions. Medical industry was when this first started to gain a lot of traction as a term. So it makes sense that eventually the International Center for Diseases would recognize it. They did a little bit better in the 11th revision, where they described workplace burnout specifically. So feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, check. Increased mental distance from one's jobs or feelings of negatives, words, you can all read words. And then reduced professional efficiency, just checks across the board with that. And then even if we look at WebMD, WebMD has 3 levels of burnout that they describe. The overburden, I'm doing too much. The under-challenged, I'm bored and not stimulated. Or neglect, I am ignored and I'm not being seen at any point in time. And WebMD also defined this in the context of the workplace. And that bothered me a little bit. Workplace burnout is very valid and absolutely should be talked about, but I can't speak for everyone. I personally have been burnt out in my hobbies. I've been burnt out in the gym. I've been burnt out in relationships before. This feels like it's a bigger issue than just at the workplace. So let's try to peel the layer back and get to a shared understanding of what burnout can be globally. And so this is what I'm proposing. Burnout is the imbalance of your expectations with the environment that you're currently in and the energy that it takes to maintain that difference. Idea being, if the environment that you're in is further away from what you expect it to be, it's going to take some effort and some energy to bridge that gap. So when that gap depletes or you don't have the energy to maintain that gap, 1, 2, 3, burnout. So that is the definition that I'm going to be operating under, and this is just what seems to make sense for me. So if we dive into this, we want to start looking at our environment. How do you perceive your surroundings? What does all of this look like? So let's talk about this. Let's meet Alice. Alice does not want to go to work tomorrow. So let's say it's Sunday evening. She does not want to go into work tomorrow. She is doing nothing but Ruby upgrades for the last 3 months, and nobody likes to do that in any way, shape, or form. And so why bother? Why does, who cares? So what she's working on is boring. It's not the problems that she wants to work on. It's nothing that excites her. Let's say that also Alice's peers just don't live up to her her standard of work. The effort that she puts in is so much better and so much more impactful than the rest of her team combined. Why on earth does she not get all of the attention when everyone else is just slacking off all day long? Super unfulfilled at her work environment. So let's talk about the framework around this. Quick pause with this. There is such a thing as a toxic work environment. There is such a thing as all of these instances happening outside of your control that should be recognized, that should be talked about, that should be dealt with. At the same time, I want to talk about why. What's the underlying cause of the environment that makes that a toxic work environment, or that makes that something that you don't feel fulfilled in? So Alice needs to work on her framework. So she needs to figure out who she is and what's important to her. These are not easy questions. No one in grade school taught me to ask introspective questions about what actually makes you tick? What's relevant to you? So through a conversation with a therapist, one of many conversations with therapists that we'll talk about today, he introduced me to the core values exercise. And this was amazing and one of the most difficult things I have ever worked on. The core values exercise was done out of a research group in, I think it was New Mexico. Don't quote me on that. I've got it in my sources. Please double check me there. The idea was he had a printout of 96 individual one-word items. These items could be tradition, they could be values, they could be being able to be appreciated, to have growth, lots of different options like that. Taking your stack of 96 things, you want to organize them into 3 columns, things that are very important to you, things that are just important to you, and things that you really don't care about. And so after you do all of that, if you're anything like me, I had about, of those 96, maybe a third of them were in these are really important to me. These actually define me. And therapists were like, cool. Now take that list, narrow it down to 10. That was hard. That was very hard because I'm all of a sudden having to decide between these things that I am absolutely certain define me, and I have to figure out, well, maybe this one doesn't define me. This isn't a core value as much as this other one is. After I finally got it down to 10, he was like, cool, get it down to 5. Yikes. Okay, get it down to 3. That was terrible in every way, shape, and form, but it was worthwhile. So these are my actual results. So the things that were very important to me is growth, is order, everything has a place and belongs in a place, and shamelessness. I grew up in a very enclosed environment, and being able to actually express and grow and try to challenge that became very important to who I am as a person. Things that were important to me are mastery, passion. I love to be able to be passionate about things. I love to be able to have a mastery about things. But when I distill everything down, that's not the core of who I am. It's a good symptom, it's a good thing to pay attention to, but it's not the core. Things that are not important to me, tradition. That's just something that doesn't resonate with me. All of these things, though, can and should look different for you than they do for me. It's a very personal journey to figure out what your core values look like, what your core building blocks look like. So we actually have this conversation in, if you've ever done any type of object-oriented programming language, we can talk about this. We have something for this. It's called abstraction. So we're trying to take these big, broad terms, these big, broad groups, and trying to, okay, let's set up an interface around it. Let's try to drill down and actually have one core piece of code that can then be used every time we need it, instead of having that code replicated everywhere. So we want to drill down to what that core value is of the code, let's say. But now we're applying that same logic to our lives. So in terms of Alice, it's asking, is there a common thread to the source of stress? Is there any unmet or violated core value? Are you solving the problems at the correct level? For instance, if you were to, that's it, I'm done with the job, go ahead and leave it because I'm burnt out, surely that's all there is to offer. You get to your next job, super great, you love it, the novelty is fantastic, a month later you're burnt out again because who knows? You never actually figured out what was causing you to get burnt out. You just figured that you were burnt out and needed to pull the rug out from underneath you. Sometimes that is a working solution, but it's kind of programming through optimism more than it is programming through knowing what's actually going on. I've definitely done that. I'm guilty of that through and through. So this is what Alice needs to do. She needs to see her job, if she sees her job as her performance is reflective on how good everyone else is doing around her, that's not really defining who she is. That's defining herself based off of a comparison to others. So if we look at that more intrinsically, it could be something that Alice's source of frustration when she abstracts everything down is a lack of validation. Maybe it's a lack of being noticed or being rewarded. And that's something that is worth paying attention to, because then that's something that she can start to work on and start to communicate, these are the things that I need to feel valued. These are the things that I need to feel seen. But you have to abstract that down to get to where that is. So as we're talking about drilling down, it's easy for things to just, I don't know. So like if Alice's next problem is just, how do I communicate any of this? I don't know what's wrong, like I just know things aren't right. So that's where a fun little thing called language comes into play. Words is hard. Words are very hard. It is hard to have the right word. It is hard to know the right word. The English language is very weird. Grammar doesn't make any sense in any way, shape, or form. And let us not forget there is always a relevant XKCD for absolutely anything under the sun. So words matter. So if I were to ask, let's say, Ron Swanson to describe the latest canoe that he's building, he would be able to tell me the type of wood that was using, the grain that goes into it, how porous it is, how aged it was, the type of varnish he's going to use. I like bourbon, so if I were to ask a bourbon podcaster about some whiskey, he could tell me, oh, on the nose, it's going to go into these type of flavor profiles. The initial taste is going to start out with a little banana and some fruit, and it's going to go into this oaky. Like, there's an entire language and conversation around that. If you ask a sommelier about wine, they can go into that. If you ask the senior developer whether or not he likes object-oriented programming or fluent programming more, he will have an opinion that goes along with that. So then, how are you doing today? Good? That's all I got. Words are important. Words matter. So there's a book called Permission to Feel by Dr. Mark Brackett, who set up an entire grid-like structure to words, to language. And so the idea is trying to distill down where words fall on this energy spectrum or on this feeling spectrum. Am I low energy, unpleasant? Am I high energy, unpleasant? Those are two different things. And you can really add a lot of nuance that goes along with this. Am I enraged at something or am I livid? Well, what's the difference between those two? They're different words, so it matters. We should have this conversation about how that nuance is important. What's the difference between feeling surprised and excited? What's the difference between feeling cozy and lethargic? What's the difference between feeling lonely and ignored? These are very important things, but until you start asking yourself these questions of how am I actually feeling in this moment, there's no real good answer. How are you feeling? Good. Somewhere on here, I'm good. That's all I've got. So the challenge that I ask is try it. Try to figure out a better word for good. What are you actually feeling? What are you actually going through right now? It's a vulnerable state to be in, but it's something that you can still answer internally and start to train yourself to dig a little bit deeper of how deep this goes. What's the, like, if I'm feeling ignored, why? In fact, as developers, if we've had anything go wrong in production, we've gone through something like this. It's a root cause analysis. We want to label it. We want to start off with saying, this is where I'm at. I am feeling frustrated. Why? Why are you feeling frustrated? Well, you know what? I'm angry at my manager. Okay, why, Alice? Why are you angry at your manager? Well, my manager was ignoring me last meeting. Well, why was he ignoring you last meeting? You can keep going with this, but already we've gone from feeling frustrated to feeling ignored. We have given a better word, a more detailed word to describe what is going on in Alice's life, and that's powerful. One of the favorite life quotes that I've learned was from Colonel Bubbles in Lilo and Stitch, where at one point in time he says, knowledge is power, and I like power. Being able to actually have this nuanced discussion to go in a little bit deeper and figure out what am I feeling and why? Powerful. because it's knowledge. Also, being able to label it and label it consistently, you can start to document this. You can start to see trends in the data of your own life. You can start to figure out, you know what, I always get super hangry about noon, and you know what, life sucks until I eat. Well, yeah, that's kind of a thing. That happens. So pay attention to it. Maybe it's not the best idea to do a code review right before lunch. So if this is your environment, these are the things that are around you that can help define where Alice is. She can talk about her core values, which can start to determine where she's at, why she feels like this could or could not be an issue, and she can start to change things with that. So all of a sudden, she can have the language to then build up a structure of what is important to her, of why it's important to her, how she's feeling, how she's responding, and she can start to grow and develop that from there. That defines her perception of her around, where she is right now. So if we switch gears a little bit, let's talk about someone who has more of a difficulty figuring out their expectations. Where do I want to be? Where do I want to grow? So if we look at our expectations, let's meet Bob. Bob does not think he is on the right path. So let's say you've got a senior developer on your team who is the go-to guy with all the answers. He is the one who wrote the iOS app. He is the guy that everyone asks all the questions. If it is a PR, he has approved it. He is the one that knows everything. And he is tired of solving these company problems. He feels like his career should be a lot more stable. He signed up for this startup thing, and it's just not going the way that he thought it would. And you know what? I just want a place that I can coast and be in a nice environment, that I'm not going to worry about it going anywhere. Bob knows pretty sure where he wants to be, he thinks. And so he wants to do something about that to put him in the right direction, but he doesn't really know what that direction is. He doesn't really know what his expectations are. So how do you define that? How do you start to figure out this is where I want to be and how to get there? So first off, I want to talk about goal setting. Goal setting is going to be one side of a coin that we're going to talk about today. Goal setting is phenomenal for precision. It's phenomenal for motivation. It is phenomenal for directions, being able to say, this is exactly where I want to end up. In order for a goal to be successful, however, it has to be smart. Goals have to be specific, they have to be measurable, they have to be actionable. You have to be responsible for it, and they have to be time-bounded. For instance, if I had the goal of I want to make senior developer, there is a huge aspect of it that is outside of my control. If the budget goes awry and there's no money for that to happen, then that's outside of my control. That goal in and of itself might not have been a good one for me. I have a friend who lives over in Ukraine, and her goal was last year she wanted to change pharmacist jobs. And then a war broke out. How many people had goals in March of 2020 that remarkably got changed? Figuring out what type of goals are actually in your realm of responsibility is a hard thing to do, but that is what gives you true ownership of the goals that you can have. Instead of senior developer, what if the goal was I want to be able to develop my own API platform? Even if that's outside of the work world, that's something that I can work towards, I can time box it, and I can make sure that I am responsible for it. It's not attached to someone else's validation for me. If the friend from the Ukraine, if her goal was to just change careers, or even just focus on careers, or pick up a new hobby, that has become something that's further into her control. If in March 2020 I had a goal to get to Japan and go traveling, that didn't happen. I thought that was in my control, but something that could have been in my control was learning more about the culture or the language or something like that, that can then be something that I am responsible for. So how we get there, how we work on it, is we've got two things that we can chip away with goals. We want to talk about routines and we want to talk about habits. Routines are going to be a very specific chunk of things that when I start X, it will be followed by Y and then Z. Habits are the more things of like this on my morning walk to work, this is the thing, this is the route that I take. So routines are a series of things where habits are more of a chunk of time. You want to play with both of them, and one leads into the other. You want to be able to work on these habits to actually develop these triggers to then set off an entire routine. I like to think of it as a routine is a series of habits that just fall into order and is something that I can work on. So goals are something that I have to be very smart about, and I can work on developing habits, which is something that is in my responsibility, in my realm of control, and that's how I can start to work towards goals. Big props to having iterative chunks and check marks along the way that you can use to do that. Mario Kart taught us all about having checkpoints along the way, and it works. Congratulations. So the other side of the coin that I want to talk about is themes. Themes, so this idea, not original, came from a CGP Grey video, and I highly recommend it. It's in the sources as well. Themes are something I like a lot more for life, for being able to navigate the craziness that is maybe a global pandemic starts. You never know. They're good for grace. They're good for life change. They're good for growth. So a theme is going to be something that is intentionally vague, because I want to track a trend line along the way more than I do specific check marks along the way. This is solving a different problem than goals. Goals are that very specific, precision matters. Themes are something that I want to try a new thing in my life. So a couple years ago is when I started going down this concept of theming, and I would pick every season, just have a new one-word, I'm not even like just a thing, a thought, a one-word something that would be in the back of my head that I'd have to constantly check in with myself and say, am I doing this? I have had themes of iterations, where I wanted to see everything in life that I possibly could as an iteration, as me trying to refine, take it one step further, move on, and see where it takes me. What I learned with that was it completely changed how I viewed even conversations, where conversations are not us going back and forth. It's let's use this to build and work towards a shared understanding. There's a word that my therapist taught me called dialogical, which is the process of using dialogue to come to a shared understanding. I like that. It resonated with me. That's something that was able to okay, conversations can be iterative and something that I can work towards with this other person to get into a shared understanding. I am just finishing a theme, which is my winter of follow-through, which I wanted to try to call myself out on me saying yes to 18 million things, knowing full well that I couldn't actually do all of them. Or, more specifically, knowing that I would try to half-ass my way through most of them. That, I feel like, is more hurtful than me just saying, no, I can't do this. I don't have bandwidth for this. This one tripped me up a lot because I felt myself like, oh yeah, no, I'll be there next Friday after work. And of course, next Friday, I'm spent. I don't want to go anywhere or do anything. And so I would look at my calendar and be like, you know what? Typically Fridays are not a good day for me. Is my calendar open? Technically, yes. Do I have the bandwidth for it? Absolutely not. So that is the theme that I am wrapping up. The next one that I'm going into is the spring of conversation. And the way that I'm trying to view this is I've learned that so many times in conversation, I will focus in on the wrong part of what's being said. And I will end up closing down the conversation more than I am trying to do a yes and let's build this up and have this continued conversation. Someone will say oh yeah, most of the time this thing happens. Well, no, but that hasn't happened yet. So it can't be most of the time because it would be the first time. That's not what they're saying. No one cares about that. But that's what I would focus in on. So I want to call myself out on it and just draw attention to it so that way I can start to figure out ways around it. So the fun part about theming is resonance. This is the huge part of what works and looks for me can and should look and work differently for you. Resonance is a fun part that goes along with a very specifically, it is the object that is being resonated more than it is the thing doing the resonating. So resonance is purely on you. What resonates with you? What themes can be intentionally vague, can be a trend line that you can work towards, that give you just this little gut check that you can start to think through and see how that's going to impact your life along the way. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about a lot of documentation things. We're talking about how we can have these goals and iterative checkpoints to them, or these themes and these trend lines that we're trying to take care of. And you know what? We have a tool for this as well. Estimations and carding, everyone's favorite thing. This is in fact a screenshot of my personal life Trello board That has been one of the single best things that I ended up doing through this entire experiment, is being able to just keep track of my life the same way that I keep track of my work. Trello works. It is, I don't know, it works for me. Results might vary. But with your estimations, you want to make sure that just like in a work environment, you don't want to reschedule a release 18 times because it's never quite ready. If you've got a release coming up and you know that it's not going to be ready, you're like, okay, we've probably got another week's worth of work to do this. I'll tell you what, the release is now going to be in 2 weeks. Do that with your estimations of your own time as well. Favorite example is if I'm driving somewhere and I know I'm going to be late, instead of saying, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I'm going to be 5 minutes late, when the GPS clearly says I'm going to be there in 12 minutes. That's optimistic. How about saying, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm running late, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Because then even if I got caught by the extra couple red lights, doesn't matter, I'm still in my new estimation. And on top of that, you're playing with setting their expectations as well. You're playing with them setting up their own environment. So this is something that you can use to then start to move their environment to a place that gives you grace along the way. So this is something that Bob can use in terms of how he's trying to set up his next steps in the career. Is, okay, if I want to change into a new position, if I want to change everything, well, what are the goals that you actually want to achieve? Maybe those goals don't in fact need an entire environmental change. Maybe those goals just need defined. Maybe those goals need to be just documented out so that way you can have a clear understanding of where Bob is working towards and what he's actually trying to accomplish. So, estimating, cards, Bob can work on that. So what's Bob's next problem? Well, Bob keeps failing at things. Let's say that Bob really wants to, like, he's done his whole goal setting. He realized that it's not necessarily like getting into an architect level or the stability. What he misses is having something new and being able to learn something new. But like, heaven forbid that the senior dev architect guy that is just amazing at everything does a pull request in a code base that he knows nothing about. Because you don't want to look stupid in front of the new junior dev. Like, that just, you can't have. Like, think of the comments you left on his pull request and then he gets to have, like, no, that's just a hard stop. We're not going to go there in any way, shape, or form. So he's mastered so much, Bob just can't fail anymore. He's locked into his track. He's good. So what I'm going to talk about next, this book, Mindset, by Carol S. Dweck, has changed my life through and through. The point of the book, in a nutshell, is talking about the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Or the way that I like to have or hear the summation, are you looking for opportunities to learn or to prove what you know? If you are approaching every conversation, every interaction, if Bob is trying to do every pull review, trying to show off everything he knows, when does he learn? When does he grow? When does he get the chance to learn something new? So that means if you have that fixed mindset of, I am trying to show off what I know, then that's all you'll ever know. You've peaked. Having this idea to have a growth mindset, you can start to seek out actual events, techniques, new code bases, new anything that can be something that you will intentionally fail at. You will intentionally be bad at. Because that's how you grow. That's how you learn. And then when you start to see every little failure as something that you can learn and take away, failure isn't really a problem anymore. There is linked in the sources again, a wonderful TED Talk by Chris Hadfield, the astronaut of the Canadian, or one of the Canadian astronauts, where he talks about fear. And I feel like an astronaut would know a thing or two about fear. One of the things that he describes in it is if you were walking through a hike and you walk into a spider web. Utterly terrifying because nobody likes spiders, and why on earth would they have the audacity to build that spider web in the middle of my hiking path? Unacceptable. If you walk into the 100th spider web, it's just a little more of a nuisance at that point. Who cares? It's the 100th one. Not a big deal. The more you get comfortable at failing and learning from those failures, the less of an ordeal it actually is. So seeing every opportunity as now not a failure, but an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to grow, who knows what you might accomplish? Because every little conversation, every little thing is something you can learn from. So Huge fan of this book. Helped change my life. Highly recommend it. How do we build it? How do we implement it? Well, we already talked about routines and habits. There's another book called The Talent Code that is basically just a love letter to myelin. What is myelin? Very short, it is a synapse cell, so in your entire nervous system, in your brain, it is a cell that brings information or a little electric signal from point A to point B. And it has this little long tail that's going to actually make that electrical transfer jump along the way. And myelin is this coating that gets wrapped around it. And it takes a long time to build. And what myelin does is make this fire faster. That means that literally, the more you do something, the faster it will actually happen in your core nervous system. So when you're trying to grow, when you're trying to learn, something that the first time might take you 30 minutes to get an absolute awful presentation forward, the next time can be done in 5 minutes and will look twice as good. The time after that can be done in a minute and look twice as good. As you're building this myelin, as you're building these habits, it becomes easier and it becomes something that you can now have this new unlocked pathway that you can use. So, how do we build this? How do we deal with all of these like growth opportunities, building the myelin, being able to do all of this? I am hugely passionate about applying breakpoints to your life. Oftentimes, this is not building something new. This is changing a habit. Change is not easy to do. And so being able to pause and recognize when this change needs to happen is a very valuable skill set that you frankly, need to exercise. You need to use it. You need to develop that myelin around it. So as Bob is trying to figure out how he can actually like not fail at things all the time anymore, he wants to put some breakpoints in his life where he can check his understanding and make sure that he's still doing on the right track, still okay with it, still growing in the direction that he wants. So this is actually a screenshot of my calendar throughout the week. Every week, or every day of the week at 10:30 p.m., I have a reminder go off to savor something. Doesn't matter what it is. It is a physical breakpoint in my life that causes me to pause and think about something good that happened today. Because that was the habit that I was and still very much am trying to break, is being so negative all the time and trying to like get so wrapped up in that. So how I am developing that myelin is to give myself a physical breakpoint in my life. That could be leaving a journal on top of the nightstand that you see every time. Even if you don't write in it every time, you see it, and that is causing you to think about something, and you've just introduced a breakpoint in your life. Any Ted Lasso fans? Okay, good, lots of hands. If you've seen Ted Lasso, the phrase Oklahoma was a very real breakpoint in his life. He describes it as when his wife would say the word Oklahoma, everything stops and you have to give what's really going on in your life right then. That is a breakpoint. You can incorporate these breakpoints into your life. Bob can incorporate these breakpoints into his life. And that way he can start to grow and understand that all of the failure that he might be seeing can have these opportunities for learning and for growth and to becoming an even broader, better developer than he thought he was before. So this is talking about our expectations. This is talking about figuring out how do we get into this camp over here. But we've got two sections. We've got my environment around me, my expectations that are over there, and there's an energy pool to maintain the difference between the two. So let's talk about that. Energy is, I'm going to talk about kind of two concepts, and they're going to be a very personal question of, are you in the phase where you want to collect energy or you want to protect the energy that you have? Sometimes what you need to do is just fortify some things and say, I have to be a little bit self-defensive right now and say that I have a limited bandwidth, limited amount of energy, and I gotta make time for me. Sometimes you're able to go out and try new things and have these habits that you can build and collect energy with that. So let's meet someone new. Let's talk about Charlie. The world sucks. Why bother? So let's say Charlie is constantly having the feeling of like, why are meetings always on Fridays? Fridays used to be fun. Like Fridays are supposed to be the time for like bacon and eggs and have some French toast, and no one wants to be in the meeting where we're talking about redoing the pricing model again because we've been talking about it for 5 years and no one has ever actually come up with a good idea with it. So why bother? The world's gonna suck. What's the point? So want to talk about gratitude. we're going to dive right into the other side of the camp. There is a course on coursera.com or .org, one of those, that is the Science of Well-Being, put on by Yale. It is if I remember correctly, a 10-week course where you are actually going through week by week, challenging with exercises and trying to learn about what gratitude can do in your life. And I went into this hugely a skeptic, thinking like, what on earth does gratitude, like, cool, like the world sucks anyway. Why do we care about finding little things to be grateful for? Till I read a study that they showed. This study was asking people 7 questions once a week. And it would be questions like, I have so much in life to be thankful for, or I am grateful to a wide variety of people in my life. And then every week they had 3 groups. They would have a group that was required to write down 5 things they were grateful for. They had a group that was required to write down 5 hassles that occurred to them in the last week. I can imagine that group had a very easy time coming up with 5 hassles. And then there was a group that was just asked these questions out of the blue. That was the control group there. What they found was that in this scoring, out of 7 points, the overall perspective of life as a whole went up as you were talking about things that you were grateful for. Importantly, though, it also it stayed about the same when you were looking at hassles or events. So it's kind of like the default behavior of humans to focus on the things that are annoying. That kind of checks out. So life as a whole can go up. The optimism towards the upcoming week can go up. Physical symptoms, so like I'm super groggy, I'm super tired, this just isn't for me type thing. Physical symptoms actually went down focusing on gratitude. The one that completely caught me off guard is, on average, people were working out more when they were writing down 5 things they were grateful for each week. So here's what we're going to do. Because I conveniently built a water break in my talk for myself, I'm going to put a minute on the clock. And I want everyone to take out a phone, piece of paper, don't care what it is, and I want you to write down 3 things you are grateful for that happened in the last week. Go. It could be as anything you want, anything that comes to mind. Maybe you had a good cup of coffee. And time. I am going to create the speaker faux pas, and if you're still working, keep looking at your phones. No one ever tells you to do that from the stage. That's fun. So writing it down helps. The physical act of putting that onto paper and putting that down is the job. That is the process. That is something Charlie can work on to help see betterness in his career, in his life. You can do focused gratitude towards the job specifically. You can do more broad gratitude towards life. The research shows it honestly doesn't matter. You're just looking for things to be grateful for, and they really all bleed into each other. The other thing that the gratitude class talked about that was absolutely blew my mind is it talked about writing and delivering a note of gratitude to someone else. And so the thought is, like, if I take the time to physically write out, hey person, this is everything that I'm thankful for, and I just wanted to let you know, have a good day, here's a letter that goes along with it. Going into that, I imagine the person receiving the letter would be just ecstatic, and that would be awesome. Probably true. What was interesting, though, is if we look at pre-test, the person who was writing the letter scored 59-ish on like the happiness scale. 1 week after writing the letter, 50% increase in happiness. 1 week after was still up. 1 month after, 3 months after was still up. I actually did this exercise once, and fun fact, I forgot to deliver it to the person. I just wrote the letter. And I still found myself months after the fact being like, you know what, that was kind of fun. That was a little bit neat. And so that happiness was able to go up just by the fact of trying to communicate that you're grateful for someone. So that's something that Charlie can work on. That's something that Charlie can do. In terms of how we can apply that to that gratitude of trying to like write down, maybe it's a once a day, maybe it's once a week, maybe it's once a month, trying to come up with these things that we want to be grateful for, we've got something for this. We've learned through continuous development and continuous implementation that we want to release small and release often because it forces us to focus on the nuance along the way. If we wait for that once a quarter release and it goes awry and we have to roll that back, that's always a fun time. If we're releasing 18 times a day and then something goes wrong and we just have to roll back that thing, it's like, oh, whoops, sorry, a test didn't actually get their way through. So release small, release often, and there's a lot of Marvel stuff coming out. That's what I learned when I literally Googled release schedule, and that was the first picture. The other thing that happens is building the habit of focusing on gratitude, and then we're minimizing large mistakes. We're trying to like really hammer in and focus on those nuance, that small amount of gratitude that we can apply to our lives. Another book recommendation, Extreme Ownership. The premise of the book is talking about how you as the person can look for opportunities to take ownership over whatever is going on. It's really trying to bridge everything into focusing on what you can control. It's another book that is talking about focus on what you can control. One of the things that they talked about that was fascinating to me was that when you're focusing on what you can control, you can directly see the impact. It's easy to fall into the trap when you're thinking about, like, let's say the C-suite is offering some new business idea that's going to be touching every single developer and every single person that's coming into play, and you're just along for the ride. It is very easy to fall in that ungrateful route of saying, you know what, Charlie's going to be like, the world sucks because you are out to get me. You are implementing these new top-down decisions because you're trying to make my life miserable. What the book talked about that I really appreciated was asking yourself from their perspective, does that CEO, CTO, VP, whomever, do they hate the company? Probably not. Are they actually, like, do they hate the people at the company? Well, probably not. Do they want the company to succeed? Likely. I mean, I'm sure they have an entire bonus schedule that's wrapped around having their company succeed. But also when you're looking at that, you have to start asking yourself, where does their decision happen because they're trying to make the company succeed? It's not because they hate me, it's because they are trying to make the company succeed. That could be that still very much could impact me. That very much could still be a horrible thing for me to go through. And I'm not saying that that justifies decisions, but it starts to challenge the assumptions that everything is bad happening to me versus what is actually going on from an objective point of view. And then we can start to focus on one step further, which is then the grateful side of it, of during COVID, I was laid off in a reduction of force. I am much grateful, or very grateful, for where I am now in my career that I likely would have never gone through had that rift not occurred. So now in hindsight, I can apply some gratitude to what at the time was one of the worst situations of my life. So trying to have this reflection going back into that and looking into this, challenging the assumptions and revisiting that challenge, revisiting those assumptions, absolutely worthwhile. So Charlie's next thing that he realized is his hobbies became chores. Maybe the world sucks because when he gets home, he's super exhausted and he really wants to just unwind with some new woodworking project because he picked up woodworking during COVID like every other person. But now he's trying to sell all of his woodworking stuff on Etsy. And so all of a sudden his woodworking project is a side gig and he's not really using it to relax. It's now a second source of income, and so now he has to get that done because he told someone that he would get it done. And so asking yourself, are your hobbies chores? So if we look into that, we want to ask yourself about when you're finding your energy, when you're looking at your hobbies, are you trying to refill your cup or conserve what you have? Hobbies very much are important. Having fun, having novelty in your life, very much important. Hobbies are also not side hustles. Once you start making money off of it, it becomes a side hustle. You can have a foot in both camps for a while, but eventually you're going to be like, you know what, I really don't feel like going to the gym today, but I'm actually coaching tonight instead of going to the gym, so I guess I don't have a choice. So being able to have that line of what you're working on and what's important to you and why makes sense. I recommend be a junior in something. Learn something new. Find something that is just a brand new skill, a brand new thing. Dust off Duolingo and try to learn something new there. Go to Khan Academy and be like, you know what, I have no idea what painting looks like. Let me see what that looks like. Be a junior in something. Learn something. Be utterly horrible at something. So you have something to learn and something to grow, and you can rediscover that passion of growth that goes along with it. Work-life balance is important. Vacations are important. Explorations are important. All of these are absolutely important and worth devoting your time to. I also like to ask, especially for developers, do you have any analog hobbies? I think the most depressed that I was during COVID, when after a long workday at 5 p.m., I would go like, gosh, that was a lot. And I would close out of Microsoft Teams and I would open up World of Warcraft and be like, cool, now I'm relaxing. Yeah, that didn't work out so well. So finding that time to get yourself away from the screen and figure out what's going on around you, find some type of hobby that you can do that takes you outside of your normal environment. There's a group in Canada that I thought was super neat called Parks RX, where they actually set up a system where any, let's see if I can get this right, any licensed healthcare provider, from nurses to physicians to physiotherapists, can prescribe nature through the program. They can actually provide a government-paid-for parks pass to all of their national parks. And they can say, you know what, your prescription is getting outside. And what they found is that spending 2 hours a week in nature with at least 20 minutes at a time per each segment was a boost to overall morale, overall happiness. And so what they would encourage people to do is build that into your schedule. Say, on these days, I'm just going to go out for a walk. Maybe you go out for a walk without taking the dogs. There's a weird thing. Sometimes it's just a chance to unplug. I have a dog that likes to bark and yell at every other dog it sees along the way, which makes for a very not relaxing walk. So sometimes it's okay to be like, you know what, no, this walk is for me. And that's okay. Finding that time to actually revisit that and go through that. So that's something that Charlie can work on. Is he can start to see what's outside, what are some analog hobbies, what are some things that I can do to protect the energy that I have, what are some things that I can do to gain and glean new energy. So when talking about hobbies specifically, I like talking about retros. Retros are a phenomenal tool that we use to have conversations around the process of what we are doing. So Charlie can retro his hobbies. Are these hobbies now a chore? Is this hobby still serving me? Do I need to step back? Do I need to step away? I have had times in the gym that there have been like, you know what, like this thing just isn't doing it for me anymore. It is a chore. It is something that I don't get to do. It's something that I have to do. And being able to take a step back from that until that longing of like, you know what I really miss? I could go for going to do this thing at the gym again. And then all of a sudden you can re-engage and relearn how to have that hobby instead of it just being, well, no, that's on my calendar because that's what I do. My identity's wrapped up into that. So clearly, if I stop doing that thing, I am no longer who I am. And so that is something that Charlie very much has to work on, is being able to retro his own past decisions. Something that made a lot of sense for him 2 years ago might not make the most sense for him right now. And that's okay. Constantly revisiting decisions is worthwhile. There's, through like the last year that I've been having conversations with my therapist, we've talked about the same thing a lot. And you know what? The answer sometimes changes because the context changes, because there are different things in life. There are different external factors. There are different motivations. So that change is something that you have to pay attention to, because you will do yourself a disservice if you are making today's decisions with 8-year-ago information. You even see it with the difference between ChatGPT 3.5 and 4. All of a sudden, getting a more up-to-date data set impacts the answers that you're going to get. So make sure that you retro your life and your hobbies. So we've come full circle. We're now at a common definition. So our burnout is the imbalance of your environment with your expectations and the energy used to maintain them. We've talked about some good tools that Alice, Bob, and Charlie have worked on to get through that. If we're talking about looking at and identifying your environment or seeing if anything's wrong with that, talking about core values, the language to define that, abstracting your environment, getting some analytics or an RCA wrapped around that. We've talked about your expectations, how to like set a goal or a theme, work towards growth, how you can use breakpoints, estimations, carding, documentation to help support that and grow towards that. We talked about gratitude, we talked about hobbies, and how you can have this CI/CD approach to things, how you can retro your life, how you can constantly grow and revisit that decision. Out of all of this, though, the most important takeaway ever to remember is, frankly, burnout's hard. Burnout is not an easy thing to fix. It is also not something that you fix once and you wash your hands of it and you're good. I have now accomplished burnout, check mark on my to-do list of life. That is over in my career. I will never expect to see that again. Doesn't really work that way. So it's something that's worth constantly being on guard for, constantly being vigilant towards, and just constantly using the same tools that we use in our day-to-day life to solve complex problems in the programming world. And just, we are worth the introspection to ask ourselves those same questions. Because we're good at it. That's the questions that we're built and we're trained to ask. So let's use them. So summing all of this up, the most important thing is to keep the conversation going. Or, actually, I can do one better. Let's start working on rubber duck debugging and pairing with our lives. I cannot recommend enough having these conversations. I highly recommend therapy in general. Again, huge fan, huge proponent of it. This is something that I firmly believe if you are a professional athlete, you are going to have a coaching and a training staff to make you the best physical person you can be to do your job appropriately. Especially in the development industry, our job is to use our minds to solve problems. Why the hell would we not have that same attention to hire a professional to work with our minds and to make sure that our minds are in the best spot that they can be to solve these problems? So, rubber duck debugging, be that conversations. I cannot tell you how much this talk has grown through just having a beer with friends, going to happy hours, conversations with my therapist, plenty of conversations with my wife, and I guarantee you if this talk is next year, it'll probably look different because there's more information to go and there's more information to learn along the way. So, got a little bit of time left. These are basically all of the books, all of the sources that I talked about along the way. QR code should take you to my GitHub that has this one there with all the slides and clickable links. I have a couple other versions of Debugging Burnout there. You can click through and see how the talk has evolved during that time. Book-wise, Permission to Feel, highly recommend it. That's the one that talked about the labeling, what's going on. The author of that book also created a mood meter, where it's an app you can download on iOS or Android, and you can just tap and give a quick little update of here's how I'm feeling right now. You can add notes for context or not, up to you, but that also gives you some data points to see some trends, because data's fun. Mindset, this book has changed my life, and I will constantly preach it, and I am so grateful for stumbling across that book along the way. The Martian, I always like putting up there, because The Martian is just, it's fun. The Martian is a way to have a fun love letter to the problem-solving process. It's never about succeeding and solving all of the problems. It's about solving the most important one that's in front of you so you can solve the next one along the way. And it's about having, the story is told in a way to have fun with that. So, huge fan of The Martian. Talent Code, that's the one that talks about like the myelin and being able to work towards athletes or professionals that have seen great success or are known as prodigies and how they can actually use to train along that way. And Extreme Ownership, talking about how you can own a lot of your own problems. Big asterisk that goes along with that. Keep in mind, there are still plenty of external factors as well. Today's talk is I want to talk about what you have power to do and encourage you to have the power to do what you need to do with it and identify it along the way. So, with that said, thank you very much. Questions, comments, my email's up there. Feel free to do that. Socials, I'm at the Samdroid, and then there's the QR code again for figuring out if you want the slides or anything like that. Questions? Anyone in here? Cool. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.